People once believed that when someone dies, a crow carries their soul to the land of the dead. But sometimes something so bad happens that a terrible sadness is carried with it, and the soul can't rest. Then sometimes, just sometimes, the crow can bring that soul back to put the wrong things right. The Crow 2024, the movie. I don't know if anyone was expecting it. I certainly wasn't. And I saw it, and I'll come back. I saw it half an hour ago. Let's talk about it. Welcome back to Monday Madness, the Monday show where I talk about anything and everything. Most recently, I have been doing the OC story and continuing on listening to your guys' votes and suggestions and making this story happen. I am going to keep going with that. Part 8 will be up later on this week, but I'm going to try and do some other content as well so that the people who love stories can still watch the stories, and the people who watch me, blather on about other things can have other things to talk about as well. Including this. So I did a very, very good job of avoiding any spoilers before I went into this movie. I didn't watch anything other than the trailers. I didn't look at the comment sections. I didn't watch any reviews. I didn't look up what other people were saying. I decided to go in, see it for myself, and have an opinion. So this video is coming to you, and I may well be saying things that millions of other people are already saying, or it might be something completely different. Who knows? I have no idea. So, let's talk about 2024's The Crow. So why was I so excited to go and see this movie? Because I'll admit I was. I saw the trailer for it and immediately thought, cool, this could be something really awesome. And this is because the first Crow movie with Brandon Lee is pretty much my favourite movie of all time. It is tied with The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus and Labyrinth. They all jiggle around, but it is in the #1 spot. So this love of the original was what piqued my interest in watching this new version. I wasn't sure what they were doing with it, whether it was just a complete remake, whether they were going in a completely different direction. I wasn't sure what it was, but because it's from a story that I really, really love, I hoped that they would do something really interesting with it and pay homage to such a fantastic film. I was both sadly mistaken and also not at the same time. Let's just talk about it then, the 2024 movie The Crow. And we'll start with, admittedly, the slightly smaller section, but we'll start with the positives. What did I like about this movie?
What's the first thing you liked about me?
Well, the first thing that stuck out to me from the trailer, and as you guys can see I have attempted to replicate here, was I did quite enjoy the makeup. The aesthetic of the Crow, the big goth makeup, the dark streaks down the face, that's always been something I really, really love. The goth kid in me absolutely latched onto this with the Brandon Lee movie, and I really liked the way that they did it in this movie. In the trailers, it looked very impactful. I really enjoyed it. The streaking down the face, it was very cool. I liked it. So the makeup got a thumbs up from me. Something else I really enjoyed were the music choices, some of the songs that were put into certain places, and just the tunes that came out of this movie. They weren't quite in the same vein as what the original movie had, but it did definitely fit the theme they were going for. It was dark, it was playful at times, and I really enjoyed all of the music choices, particularly that scene at the opera at the end, while the juxtaposition of having the classical music playing while someone's doing something horrible. Yeah, that's not an original thought. We've been doing that for years, but it still really worked. So the music choices overall, I really enjoyed. They fit, they gave flavour, and it just really set you in the scene and the mood. I definitely enjoyed the music. Something else that I really liked were some of the cinematic choices that were made, some of the scenes that they shot, particularly the slow motion ones. And spoiler alert, from pretty much here on until the very end of the video, so you have been warned. If you don't want to get spoiled, look away now. You're still with me? Great. One of my favourite scenes visually was when both Eric and Shelley are under the water, and Shelley is falling and falling down, 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 and Eric's trying to reach to her. Every time they cut away from that, the angles, the colours, it was absolutely beautiful. I love that shot in particular, and the fact that we came back to it a few times and every time it seemed to add more, I really love that. Beautiful, beautiful shot. And any time that anything in slow motion happened as well, that was pretty beautiful. One that really stuck out to my partner and me when we came out of the movie, the one thing that we were talking about was the moment where Eric is pushed off the platform and the hand just stays there and it pans as he slowly falls and falls and falls. And we decided that whoever instructed the actor to keep their hand out, that was a really good decision. It really added to the shot, the power of this push as he then goes flying backwards in slow motion. That was really beautiful. I mentioned the opera earlier when I was talking about the music, and I'll mention it again for cinematography. That was a really good scene, a really good chunk of the movie movie. It was probably about, what, 5 minutes long, I think, from start to end. I really, really loved that. The scene was set beautifully, or the setting was amazing. Everyone there looked beautiful. The music, as I said, really fit the scene and set it up. But also the pacing, the editing, the way that was done. It was funny, it was gory, it was dark, and it was very, very good. There was a lot of absolutely wonderful shots in there. Again, some slow motion too, but this being one of the bigger action sequences, it was very fast paced most of the time as well, which I really, really enjoyed. That particular bit in the opera was edited together really, really well. The last thing that I'll talk about for things that I enjoyed was that visually some of the costuming choices were really, really good. The entire opera scene, everyone in the audience, but particularly the people on the stage, they were dressed absolutely beautifully. They looked spectacular. And one of the other things that I really liked was Eric Draven's new coat when he eventually wore it. More on that in the next section, but I really enjoyed the fact that they had slit open the arms, so the armpits were free. One of the things that always strikes me whenever you see people in The Matrix or the original Crow, whenever someone's wearing a big, long, dark leather jacket, it just has that sort of scrumpling effect where it feels a bit awkward while they're having to move their arms around, and there's no real way around that unless you make it far too big for them, but then it's baggy and it doesn't look so good. So to have that sleek, leathery effect, but still be able to move your arms and point guns and wield a sword, I think that they got around that beautifully by having the armpits cut out. It was ripped and torn and tattered, and it had little details all over it. I really enjoyed the coat itself. So in general, his look when he was the Crow, when Eric Draven was the Eric Draven that we remember come back from the dead, and again, more on this in a moment, but eventually when we got it, with the makeup and the big coat, that was a really beautiful image. I really liked that. It is unfortunately the last thing on the list of things that I enjoyed about this movie. But to be fair, how Undead Return from the Grave Eric Draven looks in his full getup is fairly important. And the fact that they put enough into that I felt it was a good look, yeah, that gave them some brownie points. It clawed them back from the very edge of disaster for me, but only just. Alright, let's do it. Let's talk about what did I not enjoy.
Sometimes something so bad happens that the soul cannot rest.
I'm gonna start with a simple one because I am a cosplayer and I look at costumes a lot. Especially when I'm watching movies like this, because a lot of the time I'm looking at them and going, oh, I want to replicate that. There are none in this movie that I want to replicate, except maybe Eric Draven's, but not badly enough that I want to make it right this second. But there were costumes in this that I enjoyed, so while I am talking about the costumes I did not, the costumes I did enjoy is Shelley's, well, the outfit she died in, essentially, and she's in a few scenes where she's dancing around in it as well. It had beautiful tassely, flowy bits, and when she was falling through the water, it looked absolutely beautiful, so that was a really good choice. Loved Shelley's, for lack of a better word, death outfit. As I've said, Eric Draven, when he's come back from the dead and he's full in the get-up, he's got the makeup on and the big coat. Love that, love the armpits, love what they did there. And everyone at the opera as well. Everyone in the audience, everyone on the stage, it looked beautiful. Really enjoyed that. Absolutely lovely. So what didn't I like then in the costuming? Well, the sad answer is pretty much everything else. I was not keen on anything that Eric wore before he died. I was not keen on most of the things that Shelley wore. I really didn't care about everyone else in this because they were either in sweatpants and a vest or just generic, we're bad guys and we're wearing suits. There wasn't a great deal of imagination put into this, and unfortunately, because this movie has a counterpart to compare it to, you did spend a lot of time comparing it to the original. Everyone in that had a distinct look. Even the grungy, generic bad guys each had a distinctive look. You could tell them each apart. I forgot some people were in this movie, and I only remembered they were there when they got killed for what seemed like the second time, and then I had to remind myself, oh no, there was another generic guy with dark curly hair in a suit. Even the big bad guy didn't really have anything about him that made him seem like a big bad guy. And comparing him to one of the final bosses, for lack of a better word, from the original movie, at times he was also wearing a suit, but most of the time he was wearing something absolutely stunning. And he looked impressive in it. The guy that we had in this, there wasn't really anything particularly impressive about him, and I don't even remember his name. Not all of that comes down to costuming, though. The problem with these characters isn't just costuming, but it did pull me out of it quite a lot. Now, some of this I will admit is personal bias. I've said this before and I will say it again. I am not really fond of things set in the modern day. They don't excite me very much. I already live here. I don't need it in my movies. And anytime I watch a movie and everyone is just in sweatpants and t-shirts and jeans, I'm kind of turned off. I'm bored. I'm a fantasy kid. I like fantasy. However, the original Crow movie still managed to give me that element of fantasy while being set in the real world. It was gothic, it was dark. You had all these grungy people living in these grungy places and all this darkness happening, but everyone still looked beautiful in their own ways. No matter who it was, whether it was Sarah with her layered outfits and her little skateboard, whether it was the police officers who were really run down, whether it was the bad guys, the super bad guys, the junkie bad guys, the mom, Shelley herself, Eric, they all had these distinct looks about them, and it wasn't just that it was gothy, but I will come back to that in a second, but it was also that they looked individual. They each had a distinct character and personality, and that came out in what they were wearing. It's how we knew who Eric was killing every time he killed them. Even if you couldn't remember the name of the bad guy, you could still look at them and go, oh yeah, you're the guy who did that. That's the guy who did that. You were wearing this. I know who you are. You, and you. You couldn't do that in this movie. Everyone looked generic and a bit boring and bland, even our main characters. Shelley and Eric spent a good chunk of this movie wearing prison outfits, essentially, in their rehab place, and then wearing sweatpants and hoodies and vest tops, and then any excuse possible, Eric was shirtless. And sure, people look great shirtless, but it didn't tell us a lot about the character. We didn't get to see much in the way of what he was wearing. I think my favourite outfit that he wore was when he wore literally Shelley's coat, until he ended up wearing the big black coat and the makeup. But let's go back to the gothic comment I made a minute ago then and wrap up the costumes talk. So one of the reasons why I think the original Crow movie resonated with me so much and made me really enjoy it was because visually it was gothic. From the imagery of the Crow to the rainy streets to the rock star band that they're in to all the outfits everyone is wearing, it was very goth and grimy and grungy, and that's one of the reasons that it was just so beautiful to look at. This movie could have, and I would argue should have, done the same thing. It's the Crow. He ends up looking like this. It should have been more gothy than it was. And everything in this movie, even if you had kept it all the same, they could have done it and added to it by making everything more gothy. The costumes would have only added more to the characters. You could have individualized them a lot more. Even the bad guys kind of had a hint of gothicness to them, but they didn't. We had generic clothing that anyone could have been wearing, and nobody was given very much to distinguish them. The two main characters spent most of the time in mostly various states of undress or essentially jogging bottoms, and it was lacking. It really was. And the lack of that focus in on the gothic style really just drew me out of it. And again, some of that is personal preference, but also you could have done something with the modern day aesthetic here. Modern day gothic pulls on so many things. You could have pulled on romantic gothic, you could have pulled on the cyberpunk, anything like that. Not just, rock star in a goth outfit. It could have been anything. There are so many subgenres of goth and different versions you could have put into this, and they just didn't. I think that a lot of things about this movie were lacking because of that lack of the gothicness, and they definitely could have done something with it. I don't know why they didn't, especially because the costumes I really loved were so good. It felt even worse when the rest of them were not. And it made waiting for Eric to get into the outfit that we had seen in the trailers. Even if you didn't know what was coming and you had no idea what the story was, you'd seen him in the trailers with the makeup and the coat walking down the street. You knew what was coming and you just didn't get to it. I knew the movie was about 2 hours long, and it felt like by the time he'd put the makeup on, we'd already had an hour and a half. That's how long it felt like it took to actually get there. So yeah, it was really frustrating, particularly for me as a goth kid and as a lover of the original movie. Visually, it gave nothing. It was lacking, and it felt very bland in places because of it. But alright, enough about the gothicness and the costumes. Let's move on to the biggest thing that was the problem with this movie, and that is the script. The easiest way to say this is that the plot of this movie was all over the place, at times confusing, and needlessly complicated. But ignoring the plot, just some of the lines that were written for this, I mean, it felt like they didn't get a second draft. It felt like they went with what they said first. And especially considering how they portray Eric and Shelley in this, it felt like the writers were just sitting around high off their asses, writing whatever they wanted, and then just shoving it in and going, yeah, that'll do, that'll be it. Some of the lines were painful. I'm talking Anakin and Padme painful. I'm talking, I don't like sand, it's coarse and it gets... Oh, no, worse than that. One in particular, and the worst thing about this line was that they kept repeating it over and over in the same flashback echo because they clearly thought they'd done something with this line. But, the line itself, oh my goodness gracious me. So the line itself was this. How many people have you loved? Like, seriously loved. Now, it's not the worst line I've ever heard in the world, but it's up there, especially because it wasn't delivered particularly well either, and that's a whole other kettle of fish. The direction in this was all over the place, but this line was just so nothing, especially given the amount of importance and weight that was put onto it. This is the line that comes from Shelley that is repeated over and over in Eric's head. It's a thing that he hears. It's what drives him to kill the people and come back and keep going and going and going. And really, it didn't feel deserved. It didn't feel like that's the line that you would remember. And I sat there with myself afterwards and I thought about it and I thought not everything in films has to be profound, and this definitely thought that it was. Not everybody, if you're going for a realistic portrayal of people, we don't sound profound and beautiful and poetic all the time. And sometimes the most profound moments aren't, and that's not what I was looking for. I couldn't tell you exactly what it should have been, but I can tell you what it shouldn't have been. And what it shouldn't have been was how many people have you loved, seriously loved. I mean, number one, repeating the word seriously, which is a real mouthful already, was just very clunky. The way it was delivered wasn't great. And just as a line that you're going to use over and over again, it needs to be an earworm, not an earache. It just wasn't great. And most of the lines that were the worst were the ones between Shelley and Eric, particularly, and I feel really bad for the actors here, on Shelley's side. The most frustrating part of the script of this movie is that what I think they were trying to do was to give us more time with Eric and Shelley, because in the original we don't get very long. They are shown in some flashbacks throughout and we get to meet them just a little bit, but really and truly they are on screen very little of the time together. And this is the big sticking point, because despite spending so long, and it was a really long time, setting up this couple, showing us the meeting, showing us, look how in love they are, this film's script utterly failed to make them a compelling couple. I didn't buy their romance. I didn't believe that it was some beautiful big love. I didn't believe they had a future together. I didn't believe that they actually had fallen in as deep a love as they were leading us to believe. I didn't believe any of it. And that is predominantly to do with the scripting and possibly a bit of direction, because the acting really and truly was not that bad. They were doing the best that they could with what they had. And sometimes when it was just their expressions and the way they smiled at each other, that I believed. That was convincing, but as soon as they opened their mouths, it all tumbled away in a crumble of terrible, terrible dialogue. I think the biggest problem was that this movie didn't realize we don't need to see the setup. We don't need to see how this couple got together. We don't need to see them meet. All we need to know about them is that they are in love and they are happy. And you can set that up as, they did in the original movie, without showing us their relationship from day one. What did we see in the Brandon Lee Crow movie that set up the dynamic between Eric, Draven, and Shelley? Well, we saw his proposal to her. We saw all the candles. We saw how excited she was to say yes. We saw how their friends cared about them. We saw how they treated a child and how much the child looks up to them and cares about them, essentially as second parents. We saw little snapshots of moments of them just being sweet and romantic together, and also just being domestic and lovely. We saw all those tender moments as well as the mundane and the ordinary, a lot of it through flashbacks and memories and all of this, and that was enough to paint a solid picture. But when the Eric and Shelley of this movie, the 2024 version, died, it definitely was not as impactful. And I certainly didn't believe that they were in love enough to warrant someone rising from the grave to avenge them both. Part of it was the terrible lines of dialogue. They just had a lot of very clunky lines. They were very over-dramatic at points. Not that The Crow in general is not over-dramatic. It is. But there's a way to be over and melodramatic in a gothic fantasy way, even a more realistic way. They just didn't do that here. But apart from the lines of dialogue they had, it was very strange how, despite the amount of time they gave to this couple, they still managed to fudge the role on actually making them believable and, more than that, invest-inable. Like, I was not invested in them as a couple at all, only because I was told I had to be. And I didn't believe they were in love at all, because it wasn't love. It was obsession. Look at the point where they were. They were troubled people who'd been sent to a drug rehabilitation center. They were not properly clean yet. They were not sorting themselves out yet. They were both incredibly down in this huge dark spiral that you can tell from everything they're doing and saying. And instead of getting help, instead of trying to help each other, what do? They get out, they immediately start taking drugs again and drinking, and nothing is changed, nothing is better, and drugs don't make you a bad person. Obviously. But nothing about these two got better when they were together. And then Shelley starts having lines like, oh, you have to love me. If you weren't loving me, I would die. And Eric's like, well, if you were dead, I'd be already dead with you. And while the concept of that does fit with the Brandon Lee movie, the concept of if you died, I would be dead too. And it's like, well, yes, because it's literally true, and foreshadowing for later on in the movie. But that's not love. Saying, I need you, I will die without you, that's not love, that's obsession. And I really wanted to believe them, I really did. As I said, the looks that they were giving each other, the way that they were filmed and shot, some of these moments were truly beautiful, and I really desperately wanted to believe that they were in actual romantic love. But it didn't come across that way. It came across as two people who ran away from rehab together and within 24 hours are saying, if you weren't here, I would die. I'm dying with you. I'm going to throw myself off this bridge. I'd throw myself off after you. Dramatic teenagers would write about us. Oh my God, this is everything. You're everything. We're everything. I'm obsessed with you. That's how it felt. It didn't feel romantic. It didn't feel earned. It didn't feel sweet. It felt obsessive and wrong. And that is overall the biggest problem I had. Because the entire point of this movie, much like the Brandon Lee movie, is about that true love and how if you actually care about someone, then you can make beautiful things happen. Like when Eric comes back and he talks to the mom who is on drugs, and he tells her that mother is the name for God on the lips of children, and she realizes that she needs to actually try with her daughter, and despite everyone being dead, they managed to leave something good behind in how he talked to the mom and how him and Shelley helped to raise that kid, and hopefully those two will have a much better relationship. He managed to leave that behind because he's a beautiful, good person. And the love and the romance between him and Shelley meant that they could put the wrong things right, and he could not only get revenge on the people who killed them, but also set the wrongs right in the world and make everyone else's lives better by getting rid of all these horrible, horrible people. It was a beautiful, beautiful movie with a tragic but beautiful message that the 2024 movie was trying but fumbling to get behind. I didn't feel like they had in any way the same ending, despite doing the same sort of things. And when Shelley comes back, well, the looks that they exchange and the hug that they have feels beautiful and looks beautiful. That's all it is. It looks beautiful, but inside it's kind of empty, because despite having so long to establish their relationship, it's next to nothing. It doesn't feel earned, believable, or like a true romance. One of the biggest words that kept coming back to me over and over again as I was watching this movie and as I was walking out and I was talking about it and thinking about it was the word mournful. And I think this is one of the words that I very strongly associate with the Brandon Lee movie. It is a mournful story. And while it has hope in it, and it has beautiful tragedy, and it has horror and revenge and love, love is the biggest word that I say about this movie, love. Mournfulness is also there, especially in Eric Draven's character when he is back from the dead. He mourns Shelley. It's why he's doing what he does. He wants to seek revenge, but it's not all anger and hate. It's love. And they tried to say this in the 2004 movie as well.
It's not anger. It's love.
But if you take that line and put it into the Brandon Lee movie, there it does fit.
I love you.
Say that again.
I love you.
Let's do a wrap-up thoughts then, because I could keep talking about this for far too long. So, to sum up then, the things that I loved about this movie, some of the costume choices, the entire opera scene, everyone there looked beautiful, and Eric Draven's full crow outfit. Absolutely loved that. And Shelley's death outfit. Really enjoyed that too. I also really enjoyed some of their cinematography, some of their choices for the angles, the lighting, the way it was framed and set, some of the long shots, especially the slow motion bits, especially all of the underwater moments. They were really, really good. Loved some of those choices there. The big things that let this movie down, though, unfortunately, is the script. If you ignore all the gripes that I have about the costumes and about how they weren't gothic and they were too modern and boring and at times, let's face it, just a little bit chavvy, ignoring all of that, the script is the main problem. And apart from some of the really cringeworthy and clunky lines of dialogue, it was the fact that they failed to establish a blossoming and believable romance between the two characters who deserve it most. Eric Draven and Shelley should have been a believable, happy couple who got tragically robbed of their lives and deserve the vengeance that they get. But in the 2024 movie, their romance was too fast. It was a spiral of obsession and drug use, and it didn't feel believable by the time they died. Despite taking up so much of this movie's runtime establishing this romance, they didn't sell it to us. These two felt like angsty, overhyped teenagers who'd known each other for a couple of days. And I just didn't believe that this is true, pure love. The kind of love that would bring someone back from the grave to kill and fight for. And that, unfortunately, is the entire premise of The Crow. And so, while some of this movie was very interesting to watch, I'm glad I saw it. I can't say that it was particularly enjoyable overall, and I will be going back to watch the Brandon Lee version from now on. But what do you guys think? Have you seen this movie yet? Are you going to? What were your thoughts? What are your feelings? Have you seen the old one with Brandon Lee? What were your thoughts on that one? Let me know in the comments down below as well. And tell me this. What movie are you really looking forward to that's coming out either this year or next year? What movie are you looking forward to most? Let me know in the comments down below. And hey, tell me your favourite movie of all time as well. You know all three of mine. What is your favourite movie? Let me know in the comments down below. Alright, I will see you in another week for another episode of Monday Madness, my wonderful jelly spoons. In the meantime, keep letting me know on the part 7 of the OC story what you want to see happening next, and I'll be filming that and hopefully bringing it to you maybe Friday, I want to say, something like that. Unless I bring this episode of Monday Madness out on Friday and really confuse things. We'll find out. Enjoy your week, my wonderful jelly spoons. I will see you very, very soon. Don't forget to hydrate. Goodbye.
Can't rain all the time.
Something else I like. I have thoughts. Where the fuck was I? I don't remember. Hang on.